Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to your Daily Penguin, my march, my waddle through my Penguin Classic wall, book by book and author by author. We're in the ancient world now, and I have been concentrating on ancient Rome this week, which is always a delight for me. I'm feeling awful, uh, a little bit sick, a little bit weak, a little bit slurpy today. So this video may not go on forever. This is an author I could talk about forever, but since I'm assuming that I have the coronavirus, I'm going to cut this video short. But you saw it coming anyway. You know who we're going to talk about. This is the Penguin Classic of not Pliny the Elder, but Pliny the Younger. And this is despite the fact that he's the mewling nephew of a famous man, he's by far the better known of the two Plinys. Pliny the Elder is best known for dying in the eruption of Vesuvius, even though he wrote all of his life and was very famous in military and social and literary circles in his day. His nephew, therefore, had a foot high up on the rung of the ladder right away, out of his teens. He was perfectly poised to rise high in all of those areas, in social and also literary, and did. Much like his uncle, he had an infallible instinct for self-preservation in perilous political times, which stood him in good stead during the reign of the Emperor Domitian, who was a tyrant and who also knew how to keep a grudge and how to find people who had gone silent. He was the type of preening paranoid who viewed silence as complicity with his enemies. He needed full-throated support. He needed his toads to croak in the swamp, as an enemy of his once put it. He needed his toads to croak, not just to be there, but to sound off. Pliny was able to navigate those waters, and when better times came along under Nerva and Trajan, he flourished. He had an active military career. He wrote public speeches. He wrote lots of treaties that we don't have. This is another figure where he wrote all of his life, and we have comparatively little of what he wrote, despite his own industrious efforts to preserve it all. He knew perfectly well all about the pitiless ratio that we talk about in this series, and he wanted to guard against it. That's what these are. This is the letters of Pliny the Younger. The letters are by far the thing he's best known for, and they are 9 collections of his personal correspondence, which he carefully curated, carefully edited, carefully annotated in his own day, including keeping and fair copying the letters, and also chasing down the senders to make sure it was okay with them that he published their work. So we get a lot of letters in here in those first 9 books. The correspondence between Pliny and famous literary figures that historians and classicists have had a field day chasing down and identifying over the centuries, and also famously, in the 10th book, correspondence with the Emperor Trajan himself, on a whole matter of civic questions one way or another. By this point, Pliny was a civic functionary, much like his uncle, only without Pliny the Elder's flinty sense of independence. Pliny the Younger was what we would call a ninny, and he was shallow and pompous and a place seeker and a bootlicker, and the Emperor Trajan did not like those things. It's possible that Trajan liked Pliny, but you don't have to have any Latin, and you don't have to read very hard to see in the letters of that 10th book that very often Pliny's letters were fobbed off to subordinates and written in Trajan's name, or were written in a kind of barely controlled ill patience, with a lot of self-evident questions. One way or another, it's invaluable to have that. Just invaluable. That is what the cover is. The cover is a detail from Trajan's column, which we mentioned last time. Because Trajan, he hangs over these letters not only because Pliny preserved his correspondence with an emperor, which almost doesn't happen in the ancient world, but also because Pliny was allowed to have this kind of career because Trajan was fairly enlightened. People were allowed to think what they want and write what they please, as was said by Pliny's friend Tacitus, the Roman historian Tacitus, during the same period. And what you get in these letters, not so much the Trajan letters. The Trajan letters are valuable and interesting for other sets of reasons. What you get in the first 9 books is incredibly charming. I might have just about as little patience with Pliny's whinging and prancing as Trajan did. But he was entirely right to save these letters. He was entirely right in their entertainment value, their interest value. They fly all over the place. They are clearly not, despite the fact that they were carefully curated and published in his lifetime, they are clearly not self-conscious. Neither Pliny nor his correspondents are looking over their shoulder at posterity. And that makes the letters invaluable. They're incredible to read, incredibly fun to read. You hear about friends nagging each other to pay more visits. You hear about the trials of married life, something Pliny knew about quite well. You hear about all sorts of little things, village oddities, ghost stories, the price of goods, the life in the city, life in the country. Just fascinating. A fascinating glimpse into the normal activities of the well-to-do in Pliny's world. So, your Penguin Classic today could not be a stronger recommendation. Those of you who maybe are new to the classics of ancient Greece and Rome and might be intimidated by them, first of all, if you're intimidated by them now in 2020, I would assume you have not been watching my videos. You should not be intimidated by any book in the world, but certainly not by these. But those of you who do maybe feel that could have no better way to knock off that intimidation than to sink yourself into Pliny's letters. There's nothing here to intimidate. There's no one trying. It might be the case with long-winded Roman philosophers or philosopher wannabes like Cicero, but Pliny isn't trying to do that at all. And this is a fantastic English language translation by the great Betty Radis with a great introduction and great notes. This is a volume to find and have. If you have no Latin, this will serve you just fine as the Pliny in your collection. And whereas I was willing to say of the natural history of Pliny the Elder that there are ways and circumstances under which you could find it interesting, there is no such qualification in my recommendation of this book. You will find this fascinating, no matter what. You will find this fascinating, as any letter collection is, only this has the added benefit of being a letter collection that describes a world that we would not know in anywhere near the same amount of detail if we didn't have these letters. And that is a natural thing, right? That's a natural thing. If you're reading about another society, one that's millennia old, your natural response, your natural instinct is to want to know what that world was like. Not just the highfalutin philosophical subjects that the smartest people thought best to preserve, but what the actual world was like. Well, Pliny gives you that in very much the same kind of way as, for instance, Pepys's diary does. So it's a strong recommendation. Of course, I am what in 2020 we now refer to as a fanboy for Betty Radis. She is deserving of a biography. I don't think she's ever had one. There's a large number of these of extremely formidable academic and publishing women in the mid 20th century that did a lot to shape the landscape and have not had. There's a book there, as I've often said. There's a book there that, as far as I know, no one's ever written. But anyway, that's your Penguin for today. That's your Daily Penguin. We're sticking with ancient Rome, and we're sticking with Pliny the Younger, who tells us a lot of what we know about his uncle, and also tells us a lot of what we know about Rome in his day. So a fascinating book. So I'm going to wrap this up for now and go slurp off into the sunset. But I'll be back. We'll continue with our Daily Penguin tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.